We begin the day with connectivity projects and welcome Dominic Makaba to the stage to present his work with the Strong Roots Congo and the Strong Roots Guerrilla Corridor. Please give him a wild welcome because he spent 30 hours on the plane yesterday. Dominic Makaba manages for Strong Roots Congo, a conservation organization based in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. For over 25 years, Makaba has worked to design and oversee conservation and sustainable development programs that aim to balance the needs of humans with those of forest and wildlife. A primary goal in his work is to integrate the knowledge of local communities and indigenous peoples into effectively protected and conserved areas. Some of Makaba's expertise includes development and management of great ape habitats, connectivity projects from landscape restoration in eastern DRC. Makaba holds a master's degree from Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and is a visiting lecturer at the Catholic University of Bukavu in the Congo. Thank you.
Thank you very much for bringing me here and share about our project in DRC. So we are developing this community forestry program as a landscape and wildlife restoration strategy in the DRC. Even though we are focusing on gorillas, but it's a number of other species, including elephants, chimpanzees, and others. Talking about DRC, DRC counts about 80% of the Congo Basin forest, with a large amount of species, richness, and high level of endemism. Let me talk about great apes alone. We'll see that the eastern part of DRC, including the northern part, is occupied by chimpanzees, because chimpanzees can share habitat with gorillas. But in the middle, we have the bonobo, which is endemic for DRC, and it lives alone. It doesn't share habitat with any other great ape species. And then we have the gorillas. We have three, actually. I didn't put one in the west, but we have in red the gorilla, the mountain gorilla, which is shared by Uganda, Rwanda, and DRC. And then the eastern lowland gorillas in yellow, which is an endemic species and actually the one we are focusing on this program. So I'll be talking about a little bit about this project, how we started it, but also the problem we are trying to fix, talking a little bit about the eastern lowland gorillas, which we are focusing on, and the people or organizations which are involved, and a few recommendations at the end. We are located in eastern DRC, so this landscape is a natural habitat for eastern lowland gorillas. And it spans national parks, nature reserves, and between those protected areas, there are also community forests, and part of them we are working on. For example, we are not working on the whole landscape. Strong Roots is developing this program, the connectivity program, between Kahuzi-Biega National Park and the Itombwe Nature Reserve. And in the northern part of the corridor between Kahuzi-Biega National Park and the Maiko National Park, there are other organizations whom we are working to ensure that another connectivity program is developed over there. But how did we come to this program? DRC, when you talk about DRC, everybody says that, oh, it's dangerous, it's difficult, we cannot make it. Because we've been in wars for years. And these wars didn't affect only humans in the economy, in the ecology, but mostly gorillas and other species. So we've lost about 77% of the gorilla populations. I'm talking about this eastern lowland gorillas population between 1998 and 2016. We come up to conclude this from a census we made in 2016, showing that we remained about 3,800 gorillas out of 17,000 gorillas we censored in 1998. However, we knew that on non-protected forests, there were other populations of great apes, including chimpanzees and gorillas and other species, which means that at that time, we first documented what were the main threat to this decline. And on my research in 2006 for my degree in regional planning, we found out that mining especially was the biggest threat for this gorilla decline in DRC. And that was corroborated by De Souza, who also found out in 2006 that there were about 40,000 people mining inside Kahuzi-Biega National Park, which actually had the biggest population of gorillas. So, in 2009, I created strong roots to tackle two things. In addition to involving research in conservation, we also wanted to ensure that we could look at other population of great apes outside protected areas on community forest, because we knew that they lived there. But also, we want to see how communities could contribute outside donors, outside the government, outside conservation organization, how also local communities and indigenous people could contribute to preserve the remaining population of great apes. And also, how could we document their traditional knowledge and practices which they used many years ago to preserve the forest we meet today. So we want to use everything we knew about our long-term studies on gorillas, on research and everything to ensure that we can actually bring more habitat for gorillas and other species. So one of the things we found was interesting in this process was that we want to change the narrative about what is known, because if you read many books and you ask people, they tell you that, people are destroying the forest because they are poor. And at the end of the day, we found that it might be for other reasons. Because as you go through those communities, you found three types of people. Some of them will say, we understand conservation, we understand that it's important to preserve, but we do not have a second option. We are hungry, we are poor. That's one. But another category of people will tell you that, this forest will never end. Our grandparents, our parents hunted, cutted, exploited, and it's still there. But another category will tell you that whatever you give us, even if you build an airport in this village, we will destroy it because these were our lands you took out of our ancestors. Which means that conservation is not just about species. If we forget to involve local communities and indigenous people in the process we are doing, we are not going to reach the mega project we are looking at. And I think the main reason why we failed conservation in Africa and elsewhere is because we thought that conservation was to separate humans from nature. And we didn't understand that humans were part of nature, as gorillas are, as trees are. And this model is actually trying to test ways that we could keep communities and indigenous people together with wildlife and forest and see if there is a change. And this project, since it's connecting to protected areas, I think in the next 5-10 years to come, we can do some comparative studies and look at how things have changed within protected areas versus in this corridor to see which is the best way we can apply. We didn't just wake up and say, look what we are going to do, but we went through a process to ensure and decide what was the best strategy and approach to go. And first of all, we knew we were in Africa, in DRC, where people say, oh, it's difficult, we cannot invest there, or this on that. So we said, okay, we're gonna apply an approach which has responsibility, which is possible, and which can be justified. But we're gonna set some goals, including biodiversity conservation, poverty reduction, because it's key, and then gorilla conservation, because it's our focus. And we went through different approaches, including these territories of life or landscape approach. We thought if we could create a new protected area, or if we could go just through forest certification. And I'm sorry that the two last rows are covered by this definition of ICCA anyway. But at the end of the day, we found that ICCA and landscape approach had the highest score in terms of evaluation on which approach we could apply to preserve the remaining population of great apes on this forest. But we couldn't take the ICCA because we didn't have a legal basis for it. But the landscape approach, we've already passed the law in 2014, which actually secured community forests. I mean, giving the right of governance and management of traditional lands by community forests and indigenous people. And that's how we worked with traditional rulers and guardians of customs, because the land belongs to them. The land in DRC, it's a little bit complicated. Even the Belgian who helped us making civilization, they haven't been able to change this paradigm between the written right on land and the customary right on land. So we have both, even our constitution today. So in one part, the land belongs to the government, and in another part, the land belongs to the communities. But at the end of the day, we have to ensure that for this conserved area, for this area conserved and governed by local communities, we have titles. And last year, in August, the government of DRC was able to issue titles for the community forests composing that corridor which connects both Kahuzi-Biega National Park in the north and Itombwe Nature Reserve in the south. So this corridor is composed of 21 community forests, and it spans about 600,000 hectares. And 67% of those forests still intact. So we've been able to finalize the biodiversity surveys in the southern part of it, and we are working on continuing the inventories in the northern part of the corridor. So the benefit for this process is that communities are happy because they continue maintaining the right to their traditional lands, but also we are ensuring that we can secure a movement for wildlife species, at the same time creating opportunities for community livelihood improvement, and of course looking at climate change issues. One part important in this process is participatory mapping. The communities need to understand fully their forests, their land, and how it's combined with their neighbors' forest. And it's a whole process, as you can see it. They start by drawing on the ground, then they draw that on a paper. We bring that in an office. They go through the forest, documenting the boundaries of each forest. Then we come back again with a draft of that map in the village for approval by the communities. And when they are happy, then we produce the map which is involved in the title applications, which is in their offices and everywhere. So the participatory mapping is resource consuming, but is key step to ensure that we can succeed this project. That's why we have to ensure that we are doing strategic investment of any sense we get in this project because of that. So, as I said, once these applications for titling are approved by the government, then the government issues the titles. But then what after the title? That's where the job started, because you can have a paper, but if you are not working with all key stakeholders, then you are getting nowhere. We've learned two important lessons in this process. First of all, not all conservation initiatives contribute to reduce poverty in communities. But also, not all projects reducing poverty contribute to biodiversity conservation. So we need a just middle between biodiversity conservation and sustainable development for communities. We may do one and lose another one, and it's not going to work. Another big lesson we've learned from this, recognize that we've succeeded this project because of documenting and applying traditional knowledge and practices which indigenous people and local communities have used for centuries. But at the same time, we've also used a lot of science and new technologies to reach there, which means that no one will work alone without the other one. Because sometimes we say, oh, traditional knowledge, they are not working alone. They need to add science and new technologies. Of course, I have nothing against science, but I have something against scientists. We have to ensure us that all the conclusions and evidence we provide are real. Because if we try manipulating data or changing conclusions because of political ends, then it's not working. That's not science. Main key stakeholders, they are numerous, but we need the government on our board. We need the communities. We need the researchers and media. Donors as well. Sometimes we say funding is not a project. Funding is a tool to make a project successful. I know many big organizations have failed because they thought that because we have money, we can succeed a project. Many projects have failed with billions. And some projects without a lot of money have succeeded because only people have been able to coordinate among the stakeholders. We are looking at natural regeneration in some areas. At the same time, I didn't put a slide, we've planted more than 2.8 million trees around Kahuzi Biega National Park, but at the same time, we're observing some areas to see how natural regeneration is happening, so that later after we can look at where we plant trees and when natural regeneration occurred, what is the difference and what we can promote in areas which looks like those ones. We are looking at a number of other projects, and one, we are establishing a National Institute of Primatology because we found out that DRC count a lot of primate species which we don't know as local people. Scientists may know it, but how do we encourage local people and other people in the region or people coming from outside to really assure that they can understand about primates in DRC? And after securing 600,000 hectares of forest, we are working in the next 3 years to secure additional 400 hectares to make up a 1 million hectares, maybe by 2025. And we are strengthening this landscape conservation program by also documenting the interdependence between the aquatic ecosystems and forest ecosystem. Because again, I didn't put this slide where the Kahuzi Biega National Park, for example, is providing 40% of water of Lake Kivu. So we documented this and found out that there are 17 rivers getting out of the park and fueling water in Lake Kivu and providing every single day about 2 million cubic meters of water. So if we lose just this small part of the forest, of the highland part of the park, we're gonna lose 2 million cubic meters a day in this lake. So we've been documenting this so that people can understand how they are all interconnected. We cannot have the lake without forest or the forest without this lake. And of course, we continue working on what we've started to ensure that all these programs we've started, they are not just for 5 years, for 10 years, but we can preserve this forest. Today we have 67% of darkness of this forest, but we want to see after 5 years, 10 years, how much is intact. Did we increase or decrease? And that require an ongoing monitoring. We also, go through all this process of calculating the index of forest intactness and so on to ensure that we are on track or we are coming back. So all of this goes through this ongoing conservation and sustainable development project, but also continue conducting these surveys, socioeconomic, health, or biodiversity surveys along the corridor. And we've had support from the International Conservation Fund of Canada, Good Energies, the David Livesell Pankard Foundation, Rainforest Trust, Errol Foundation, and others. But let's say that we are working on this program with Forest and Health Alliance, which is based at the University of Toronto. They've been providing us with technical support while benefiting financial support from these foundations. So let me stop by here and wait until we can have questions maybe later. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Dr. Jody Hilty, who is the president and chief scientist, one of the good ones, of Y2Y. She's specializing in ecological corridor and large landscape research. She has more than 25 years of experience managing large landscape conservation efforts. This work focuses on applying best available information to address complex challenges through community-based collaborative efforts, and also supports Indigenous leadership in conservation. Author or editor of 4 books, she also led writing of the 2020 IUCN Guidelines for Conserving Connectivity as the deputy chair of the IUCN Connectivity Conservation Specialist Group. Please give Jody Hilty a warm welcome.
Good morning. It's great to see you all today. Thank you so much to the University of Pennsylvania and all of the co-organizers. I barely recognized Rob. He showed up in my office and he'd been camping for like 30 days or something like that. So it turns out he can clean himself up. But really, what he's doing is so important. He's getting out into these landscapes. He's actually meeting people in these landscapes and understanding connectivity. And that's, it's so, so important. So today I'm going to take you on a story, which I hope is a story about optimism. And it builds off of the work of so many people. One of them is Gary Tabor, sitting in the room here. Gary, wave your hand. He's one of the co-founders of the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, along with others like Harvey Locke was mentioned by Tony Hiss, and many, many others. And so I've come in to this project and am fortunate to be helping to continue to advance it. So let's get going. Let me tell you a little bit about my landscape. And what you're going to hear is a lot of themes that are really similar to what Dominique was talking about. Really the same kinds of issues no matter where we are in the world. So this landscape is a little bit of a different landscape from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but similar in that it still has most of the species that have been there for a long, long time. And if we're not careful, we're going to lose them. So where is this place? It starts all the way down in Wyoming and goes all the way up to the Yukon, to the Arctic Circle. So it's a 2,000-mile stretch. The vision, which is a collaborative vision, is about connecting and protecting this area so that people and nature can thrive now and into the future. And the approach from the very beginning has been an evidence-based approach. So let's use science, let's use indigenous knowledge, local knowledge, in order to inform what we need to do, where we need to do it, and how we need to do it. And it's a collaborative approach. So since the beginning of this effort, at least 700 different groups have worked together. My organization, the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative, tries to facilitate groups to work together. Right? And so we don't do anything by ourselves. Success is about communities of people advancing conservation. That's how conservation gets done at this scale. The other thing that I really like about this vision is, yeah, it's really local, but occasionally we work really incisively at the national and at the global level to ensure that the enabling framework, enabling policies exist to get the work done on the ground. So back to the vision, early 1990s was about the time that we started to be able to really understand how animals were moving through the landscape. So there was this wolf, Pluie the wolf, and she got a GPS collar on her. And so she was collared just south of Banff National Park, and she took 100,000 square kilometer jaunt. It used to be, for those of us who were scientists back in the day, you'd have a collar on them and the animal would disappear from the landscape and you'd wonder where they went. Maybe they'd come back and you'd catch them again, or maybe not, but you never knew. So this one, we had to call down to Texas to find out where she went because the satellite collar was only programmed for one small area. And lo and behold, she went across 3 states, 2 provinces, 30 different types of land jurisdictions, from Native American reservations to public lands like protected areas and national forests to private lands, and much, much more. And then she was legally harvested just south of Kootenai National Park. So what do we learn from her? We learned that if you want to conserve animals like her, that we're not operating at the right scale. Protected areas are critical, but if we want to conserve animals like her, we have to functionally work at a large landscape scale. And we can kind of see this in things like the historic distribution of grizzly bears. So grizzly bears used to be all the way down into Mexico. And then by the 1920s, there were these isolated populations. All those brown isolated populations, they all went extinct because eventually there was no breeding female there, or somebody shot the last of the animals. And the only one that's left is that Yellowstone population. And many, many groups are working together to try to reconnect that currently isolated population to its more Canadian counterparts. And we're getting closer. The other thing I wanted to say about Y2Y is, at its founding, I'm not going to ask where you all are on that graph, very scientific, is that Y2Y is a response to climate change. It's a north-south corridor. Animals can move up in elevation to different slopes, different elevations, but also what's being done on the ground by all of these different groups is a response to climate change. It's about more protected areas. Tony said that really well. We need more protected areas. They need to be bigger. We're making them bigger, and we need to reduce stressors. So all of those things are happening in this landscape. And what I would say is that my hope is that Y2Y and all of these other 10 mega projects are really hope and sort of the guiding star for millennials and Gen Zs who are really worried about their future. And I think this is a really important way forward for halting and reversing the loss of biodiversity and also addressing climate change. Okay, so how does Y2Y actually get stuff done? What does it look like? So we talked about using an evidence-based approach. How can we gather the information we need in order to, take the measly conservation dollars we have and have the maximal effect? And we talked a little bit about how it takes collaboration, all the different entities working together, and it's a big tent umbrella approach. But what do we actually need to do? So the first thing is about protected areas, right? And we know the global definition is that it's about conserving biodiversity first and foremost. Well, the whole world committed to 30% of nature by 2030, and Y2Y really looks to push at least to that point, if not well beyond it by 2030. And obviously that's on the way to getting to what nature needs, more like 50%. So where are we at? Well, we're at about 18%. We know that from 1993, when the Y2Y vision came into being, until now, we've seen an 80% increase in protected areas. Okay, so that gets us a ways, but we got to get to 30%. Well, fortunately for us, already the federal government, indigenous governments, and regional governments committed to another, actually not 14 million. This is great. I love when my slides are out of date in like months. It's actually about 19 million acres that have already been committed to in the Y2Y region alone. And we have about actually 17 different First Nations who are asking us for their support to move forward indigenous protected areas, which would move us well beyond 30% protected. Our job is to remove the barriers in order for those indigenous-led protected areas to advance. Today, already, about 25%, at least 25% of all of the protected land is either managed by or co-managed by indigenous peoples. And like Tony said, this will continue to increase over time due to the commitment, particularly by Canada for indigenous-led conservation, but also increasingly in the United States. So what's the second ingredient? The second ingredient is about wildlife corridors and ecological connectivity, right? And so in our landscape, primarily, this is about voluntary private land conservation because our high elevation areas are public and the low elevation valleys that the animals have to get across are often private. And then the second is where there are really busy roads, it's getting animals across the road. So this is being constructed just east of where I live. My daughter calls it Mom's traffic jam. Yeah. And Y2Y has been advancing these things. So we have about now actually about 500,000 acres of privately of advanced private land protections in the region, including the biggest private land conservation deal ever done in the United States. It was led by the Nature Conservancy, and Jamie Williams says that one of the things that inspired that was the Y2Y vision. And then we have all of these wildlife overpasses and underpasses, and we just updated our count last week. It's over 130 now. Are we there yet? No. We're seeing in British Columbia, it's normalized. So everything that they're doing, every time they upgrade a road or paint a road, they're thinking about connectivity now. Montana now has a system. It's a step towards normalization, but we've got to get to normalization of wildlife crossing structures. I'll just dive a little bit into structures for a second. Do they work? They do. 96% reduction in hooved animals. That's deer and elk and moose, the things that kill people. So it's making the roads safer for people and wildlife. And even really rare critters like wolverines occasionally are using these crossing structures. We have bears that are having breakfast on one side and lunch on the other. And we know a lot about them. Females will only use overpasses, female grizzly bears, but males will use underpasses. So if you want to have demographic connectivity, you actually need both. In case you don't believe me that we need wildlife crossing structures, this is truly a horrific, horrific scene. So these are two colors, but it's one bear named Lingapolter who bounced off Interstate 90 in Montana over 40 times. Really, really, really wanted to get to the other side, and finally on the far left, it made it under an underpass. So we're looking to get 4 roads by 2030 safe for wildlife passage. We want to finish Highway 1, where there's about, I think, 55 crossing structures right now. Highway 3 is that second road just above the US border in Canada. I-90, I talked about a little bit, and then Highway 93, where some structures are starting to go in, but we need a lot more. And I talked about this a little bit, but I think, so we have some really neat work happening just in southeastern British Columbia with 9 crossing structures, including an overpass. We're getting publicity about this in things like Canadian Geographic, but it's really part of a much bigger global movement. It's around India getting, literally lifting the highway and allowing tigers and elephants to go underneath. It's about Los Angeles building the largest overpass ever. And it's about capturing people's imaginations and making it okay for politicians to actually put money where it's needed. So back to how we get it done on the ground. I'm going to talk a little bit about this border region. And I'm going to talk about science. Sorry about that, Dominic. But this guy, Michael Proctor, started to look at the genetics of grizzly bears. And what I want you to notice is that this used to be once like a single population, genetically intermixed, and those yellow dotted lines are now distinguishable populations by genetics. And if you look really close, you might notice that most of those yellow dotted lines follow roads, right? That's a problem. For us, we're starting to see the animals on the border just get more and more and more isolated. They're not going to survive, right? So what do? Well, then we go to the scientists and we say, okay, ecologically speaking, where are the places that we need to enhance connectivity? But we don't stop there. We actually have to go to the communities and say, where is it realistic on the ground, right? So there is a second part here. And then we work on restoring those. So in this case, we worked with 60 different partners in this transboundary region over about 15 years. Among other things, we worked on these 4 linkages, right? All of them were either bought, restored, and what's really cool is Michael continued to follow the grizzly bears, as grizzly bear biologists do, and those grizzly bears have used those corridors. So we know that it worked. And in that bigger project, it was about purchasing those private lands. It was about securing the private lands, restoring them, and removing attractants. So for grizzly bears in particular, things like chicken coops, fruit trees, those are things that will attract bears and end up killing the bears in the end. And because of all that work, on the US side, we had one population of grizzly bears that was 10 individuals. We thought it was going to get to 100, but actually it got to 60. Now what we're doing is we're taking that approach a little south. So you can see the border up there where it says Creston and Kalispell. That's where that project was working. Now it's about getting the grizzly bears, as I mentioned earlier, the northern Canadian grizzly bears back down and connected with the Yellowstone population that's less genetically diverse. So this happens to be another approach that scientists take to understanding how grizzly bears get through landscapes. It's called circuitscape, or it's using electrical circuit theory. And lo and behold, we have 15 places that we know we need to secure, 65,000 acres, and some of the key busy roads. The last ingredient that we really focus on is about nature positive communities. How do we get communities to advocate for nature at scale, right? So one of them is that they have to know that they're living in the wildest mountain region left in the world. The second is around, what do they have the tools that they need? It might be economic tools. How do they transition away from a natural resource extractive community into a community that focuses their economy on nature positive pieces, and it might be about coexistence. So the example of coexistence, we have these really good models. The Blackfoot Challenge is a whole watershed that is really focused its ranching on how to ranch successfully with large toothy animals. And over in the town of Canmore, it's a great model for how urban communities need to be able to manage their trash, manage their dogs, manage different attractants so that animals can literally flow through their town. We had, kid you not, a dozen grizzly bears for 2 weeks in a town of 14,000 people, and all those grizzly bears survived. It can happen. Now our job is to take those incredible models and remove the barriers that allow them to get to scale across the Y2Y region. So along with Tony's book, there's a huge effort around getting the information out about Y2Y. The West Wing show called it the audacious idea. No, they called it the wingnut idea, actually, back in the day. But now we're seeing that actually this large landscape concept can work. It does work. It is making a difference. We've seen the protected areas increase in size. We've seen animals recover. We've seen increases in connectivity. But we have some challenges, right? We have to make sure that nature is nonpartisan. That is success for nature. That is success for climate change. I mentioned this, but it's easy to create singular models. It's much harder to get those across 2,000 miles. And the last thing is that when a quick change in policy leads to something like removal of old growth forests, that can happen in days, but it takes lifetimes, maybe never, for it to recover. And so we always have to be on our toes. So I'll end there, but I would be happy to take questions later. Thank you.
Wow, what an inspiring presentation. Thank you, Jody. Next, we have Miss Ana Maria Gonzalez Veloza. Ana Maria Gonzalez Veloza is a Colombian national who has worked since 2008 at the World Bank in conservation and sustainable development projects in Africa and Latin America. She is currently the coordinator of the Amazon Sustainable Landscapes Program and task team leader for several projects in Amazon countries. Before she worked at the Nature Conservancy and in her home country in multiple research, public, and civil society organizations, Ana Maria is an economist with a master's in environmental and natural resource economics from Universidad de los Andes and a master in international development. Next, we have, and in the same group, we have Senora Andrea Fernanda Calderon Caicedo. And for that, we have David Gouverneur, a good friend and a professor of practice here at Penn, who will be translating the Spanish. David, would you mind reading or translating?
She has her master's in agroforestry, specialized in management and of sustainable development, managing projects, and landscape mitigation, adaptation to climate change, with a vast experience in programs and plans working for the public sector at a national, regional, and local scale.
Let's welcome them both to the stage. Thank you.
So, hello everybody, good morning or buenos dias. So I'm going to be brief because Andrea is the star. I am going to present, before zooming into Colombia, let me start by mentioning, oops, give me 1 second. Okay. Let me start by mentioning that the project Heart of the Colombian Amazon, or Corazón de la Amazonía, is part of a larger program or a mega project, which is called the Amazon Sustainable Landscape Program. Here the slides mention that the program is included in Colombia, Brazil, and Peru, but since 2 years ago, so this needs to be updated, the program was expanded to Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, and Suriname. It's over 115 hectares of protected areas and other areas around connecting different landscapes within the 7 Amazon countries. We are lucky to have in next year Venezuela to join, so we will have a program that has all the 8 Amazon countries. And Corazón de la Amazonía, or Heart of the Colombian Amazon, is part of that program. And I'm lucky to be the coordinator for the program, but also the task manager for this Colombian project. And going now down to the Colombian project, this is still smaller than, of course, the Amazon basin, but it's still an important mega project, around between 10 and 11 hectares of areas within protected areas, indigenous territories, Ramsar sites of intervention. But one of the things that makes it also a mega project, it's the way that it's implemented, the institutional arrangements where it's not only a single organization, but it's all the Ministry of Environment, but also the other institutions and authorities and civil society organizations together working towards the goals of the program. The goal of the program, of this project, is to improve governance, conserve biodiversity, and promote activities of sustainable management in the land and the waters to reduce deforestation and to improve the livelihoods of the communities that live there. This is a project that started since 2014, so it's also mega in the sense of the long-term commitment from civil society, from the governments. We have survived 4 presidential presidencies, and we have continued being a project, adapting to the changes, but we're still there. And that is also part of what makes, like, one of the lessons, the long-term commitment, because changes are not happening quickly. Also, it is, like, of course, I don't need to explain to this crowd that biodiversity and the diversity and the cultural diversity of the Amazon and the Colombian Amazon, but we work very closely with the indigenous communities, with the local communities, not understood as beneficiaries, but understood as actors, and active participants and decision makers. Just to mention that the objectives of this project are to protect the connectivity between protected areas, indigenous territories, Ramsar sites, and other area-based conservation measures. Another component on sustainable use of natural resources and water and land. The enabling conditions for that conservation, for that sustainable production in terms of law policies, regulatory efforts, governance, strengthening of governance. And then the final, not more important, but very important, is management of knowledge and monitoring and evaluation and communications. But I said, Andrea is the star. She's the one that goes to the field, She goes to the field, and she's the one that makes the transformational changes that are needed at family level to make it a bigger scale effort. So, Tutu. Okay.
I have a question. Why am I translating and not you?
Because I lose my voice.
Okay.
Okay. Gracias, Ana María. Gracias, David, por el apoyo que me vas a hacer en la
Thanks, Ana Maria. Thanks,
traducción.
David.
Entrando en materia, ¿cómo nosotros implementamos nuestros componentes de este proyecto?
How do we implement the different components of the project?
Tenemos unos criterios de intervención a nivel de paisaje.
These are our landscape intervention criteria.
Y estos criterios están asociados a poder nosotros mantener la conectividad entre los Andes, la Amazonía y la Orinoquía.
And basically, we're trying to establish the connectivity corridors between the Andes mountain range, the plains, and the Amazonia.
Cuando participamos en estos espacios, siempre vemos la problemática de la Amazonía asociada a la deforestación, la minería y la ocupación por parte de grandes terratenientes que llegan a estos territorios.
And looking into the Amazon, we always have to cope with the major problems or challenges. One is illegal mining, deforestation, and the occupation of population that's moving into the areas for different causes, different reasons.
Pero hoy es la oportunidad de no hablar de la tragedia de la Amazonía, sino cómo las comunidades y el Sistema Nacional Ambiental
trabajamos para mantener y garantizar la conservación de estas áreas
But today,
estratégicas.
I don't want to speak about the tragedy of these forces in action. I want to speak about the possibilities.
Promover la conservación y el uso sostenible de la biodiversidad es cómo hoy estamos encontrando que las familias se vinculan a estas estrategias.
And as we've heard before, the main way to promote the conservation of these resources is to engage the communities, to engage the families that live in these territories.
Los bosques, el agua y la fauna no son intocables.
Okay, the forest, the water resources, and the fauna are not untouchable.
Y cuando generamos un trabajo mancomunado entre el gobierno, las comunidades y los territorios indígenas, podemos garantizar la sostenibilidad de la Amazonía.
And then when we establish a networking relations between the natural systems, the communities, and the government, then we can aim towards sustainable policies.
A partir de nuestros criterios que nos llevaron hoy a estar acá en este gran evento, tenemos los corredores de conectividad en la Amazonía colombiana.
Okay, based on these criteria that I mentioned before that leads us to be part of this great event, then I will go in to mention some of these connectivity corridors that we've selected.
Okay. En la primera imagen vemos nuestros corredores de conectividad para el bioma amazónico, que en total son 9.
In the first image, we see the connectivity corridors for the Amazonic biome, which are basically 9 corridors.
En la imagen del centro vemos los conflictos socioambientales que están afrontando estos corredores de conectividad.
In the second image in the middle, we can see the conflicts that are affecting the area.
En color rojo ven la presión de la deforestación en nuestro país.
In red, we see in the third image the deforested areas.
Y en la última imagen, el conflicto más trágico, recurrente y que vulnera no solo los bosques, sino la sociedad, el orden público, los actores armados.
Wow, and then in the third image on the right, you can see most of the severe conflict, which is very particular for Colombia, is the armed conflict, the violence that is affecting this area.
Entonces, el reto está en cómo armonizamos estas realidades de territorio para garantizar la conservación de los recursos
So the
naturales.
challenge is how we deal with these limitations, these forces that have to come together or neutralize to be able to aim towards conservation policies.
En esta imagen vemos la Amazonía colombiana compartido, más que compartido, los departamentos que conforman la Amazonía colombiana.
Okay, in this image, we see the departments, which is the equivalent of the states in Colombia that comprise the Colombian Amazon.
Y nuestra área de intervención está en el color magenta, amarillo, azul y verde.
Okay, and in the different colors, you see the areas where we have our priority projects for intervention.
Esto hace parte, el color magenta hace parte del corredor de conectividad Chiribiquete, que es una de las áreas protegidas más grandes en nuestro país.
The lilac color that you see there is a corridor called Chiribiquete, which is one of the largest protected areas in Colombia.
El color azul hace parte del AMEN, conformado por los departamentos de Meta y Guaviare, en donde aquí es la transición entre la Orinoquía, los Andes y la Amazonía.
Okay, and in blue, you see another of the protected areas, which is a transition between the Andes, the plains of the Orinoco, and the Amazonic area.
En color amarillo encontramos un corredor de conectividad muy importante que ya se conecta a nivel internacional con otros países que hacen parte del programa ASL explicado por Ana María.
Okay, and then in yellow, we see part of the corridors that work at a regional scale going across the borders to our neighboring countries.
Hemos hecho una proyección de la sostenibilidad de estos corredores al 2030.
Okay, we've considered the projection of how we can work upon these corridors, having as a goal the year 2030.
Y los resultados son trágicos.
And the results are tragic.
And that for an analysis giving us tragic indicators.
Nos concluye en que la conectividad, nos concluyen estos resultados en que la conectividad se va a perder.
So according to these projections, connectivity will be lost.
Y eso debido a la pérdida del bosque que en nuestro país anualmente en la Amazonía oscila entre los 80,000 hasta 100,000 hectáreas.
Okay, and por año.
Por año.
We estimate that the tragedy is based basically on the deforestation, the loss of our forests. And we estimate that between 80,000 and 100,000 hectares are lost per year.
Una crisis que se ha desenfrenado o se ha acelerado desde el año 2017 hasta la fecha.
And this crisis has been accelerated since the year 2017.
Esto motivado, que parece irónico, una vez se firman los acuerdos de paz en nuestro país,
And ironically, this situation is derived from this signing of the peace treaty in Colombia.
se agudizó la deforestación y empezó un proceso desacelerado de colonización.
Okay, and why? Because after the peace treaty, an accelerated process of colonization began, which resulted in deforestation.
Es por ello que de los 9 corredores que hoy les estoy presentando, nuestra intervención se está centrando en 3 de ellos. El arco de amortiguación de Chiribiquete, el Chiribiquete Amén y el Chiribiquete Nucat.
And therefore, of the 9 corridors that we had pre-selected, our work is being focused on 3 of these corridors.
Which is the pink,
Pink,
the light blue, the blue and the green above. So those are connectivity corridors between protected areas and high biodiversity areas. So the focus is on there because it's where there's more biodiversity threats and deforestation threats. Sorry.
¿Y qué encontramos en estos corredores de conectividad? Recursos biológicos que todos los hemos hoy manifestado en nuestras presentaciones.
You know, and in these corridors, we can find all the environmental assets that we've heard about in previous presentation.
Los principales para nosotros, bosque, agua y fauna.
So again, the forest, the water resources, and the fauna.
Y lo más importante, comunidades, colonas, campesinas e indígenas.
Okay, and what's more important is the human resources. And these are the indigenous population, but also the colonists that are moving in.
Y para que todo esto fluya, tenemos un Estado, un país, un sistema nacional ambiental.
And then we have like a national planning system at different levels that have to be working integrated,
Que construye políticas
that advance policies
para el manejo y uso sostenible de los recursos naturales con las comunidades, como nos explicó nuestro compañero del
again,
Congo.
for sustainable development, working with the communities, as we heard in previous presentations.
Viendo los recursos naturales como una oportunidad para la consolidación de una economía de base para las comunidades que habitan la Amazonía.
And here we see the conservation of the natural resources as an economic opportunity for those communities that inhabit the Amazon.
Nuestra tarea radica en corredor de conectividad Chiribiquete-Nucat. Vemos 2 parches rojos y estamos haciendo acciones de restauración para que la biodiversidad se comunique, se recupere, se regenere.
So in the first image on the left, you see the 2 protected areas and the corridor linking them and restoring the habitat.
Sucesivamente, con el corredor Chiribiquete-Amén, donde vemos los 2 parches en rojo, nuestro reto radica en unir esos 2 parches en rojo a través de acciones de restauración.
Again, similarly, in the second corridor, we have the protected areas and how we have to connect these isolated patches.
The ones that are on red.
On red.
Okay. Y el corredor Chiribiquete-La Paya es uno de los corredores en mejores condiciones, sin embargo, hay mucho por hacer, mucho por trabajar.
Okay, and then similar, in this one you see they're more dispersed, the patches, but they're in better condition than the other ones.
Entonces, nuestra estrategia de garantizar la conectividad está asociada alrededor del recurso hídrico.
And of course, to guarantee this reconnectivity of the habitats, obviously the focus is based on the hydrological system.
La escasez del recurso hídrico es una de las principales preocupaciones del campesino.
So, and of course, the lack of water is one of the main preoccupations or interests of the local population that lives of agriculture.
Y a partir de esa necesidad es que hemos ganado gobernanza para la implementación de este proyecto.
So the communities understand that the water is basic for their survival. That is where we establish the liaison with the communities and bring them part of our conservation policies.
¿En dónde estamos actuando?
And where are we acting? What areas of intervention?
En el mapa vemos la Amazonía colombiana.
Again, we see the general area of the Amazonian area of Colombia.
Y ahí el nombre de nuestro proyecto, Corazón de la Amazonía.
And hence the name of our project, which is the heart of the Amazonia.
Estamos trabajando en el centro de la Amazonía, donde en el centro se concentra la deforestación, la minería, la infraestructura vial no sostenible.
And why are we operating in the heart of the Amazon area? Because that's the area where illegal mining, deforestation, agriculture, and infrastructure, unsustainable infrastructure is also located. All the illegal roads and infrastructure.
Y el no hacer una acción inmediata y correctiva nos va a llevar al acabose de los corredores de conectividad.
No. And therefore, if we don't operate in this central area, in this heart, that would mean splitting apart the connectivity corridors.
Vamos a explicar dónde estamos. Entonces, trabajamos directamente con las áreas protegidas, buscando la conectividad de ellas, y es lo que vemos en verde claro. 9 áreas protegidas del Sistema Nacional de Áreas Protegidas.
In light green, we see the connectivity of the protected areas.
So in light green are the 9 protected areas of the areas of intervention of the project. And the previous maps of the corridors are the corridors to connect some of those protected areas in light green.
En color magenta vemos las áreas protegidas regionales construidas con las comunidades para salvaguardar los recursos naturales.
Okay. In lilac, we see the regional protected areas that we're working with the communities, with the local communities.
En color azul, los sitios Ramsar, donde son liderados por las comunidades indígenas y se hacen inventarios de flora, de fauna y el manejo de esta misma para su seguridad alimentaria.
In blue, we see the Ramsar wetland areas that are also managed with the communities.
Y en color naranja,
And in
Orange.
orange yellow,
tenemos los resguardos indígenas,
okay, which are the indigenous reservations.
que tienen todo el conocimiento ancestral y autonomía para el manejo de sus recursos naturales de acuerdo a la política de nuestro país.
Okay, and then of course there are all the ancestral knowledge.
To manage and also legal recognition by the Colombian government that they have the authority in those territories.
Y adicionalmente otras áreas en diferentes colores orientadas a ejercicios de ordenación forestal ya existentes en territorio.
Okay, and then there are other patches that have to do with forestry management, some of the programs that already were in motion when we started working.
Nuestro grado de intervención en la Amazonía, como se ve en el mapa, es gigantísimo.
So it's a very large area that we have to attend, complex and large.
Por ello, la continuidad de nuestro proyecto en esta área.
Okay, and therefore the importance of the continuity of our project, of our action in such a large territory.
¿Cómo trabajamos para contener la deforestación?
Now, how do we operate to contain, halt deforestation?
Son muchas las estrategias que ha tenido el país y la Amazonía el bioma amazónico. Sin embargo, la oportunidad hoy está concentrada en la restauración participativa y funcional económica de nuestros ecosistemas.
And again, the strategy that we're emphasizing is to associate reforestation to economic activities.
Realizamos ejercicios con las comunidades a partir de cartografía social,
Okay, so we engage with the communities with participatory cartography, as we said before,
identificando cuáles son esas áreas críticas de los predios para así motivarlos a ser parte del ejercicio de restauración.
Now, and we identify the critical areas, again, to motivate the communities to take action, to work together with us,
Y siempre bajo el principio de garantizar una conectividad de los bosques y el agua.
and again, ensuring connectivity between water and forest.
Como país, en estos últimos 4 años, hasta el 2026, tenemos una meta de restaurar 750,000 hectáreas.
Until the year 2026, we have the goal of restoring 700,000 hectares.
De los
750.
de los 23 millones de hectáreas que tenemos para restaurar en todo Colombia.
And that is only a portion of the 23 million hectares that require restoration in all the country.
Y al final, para poder cumplir esta meta, necesitamos no solo de la voluntad política, sino de la voluntad de las comunidades y de los cooperantes que hacen una inversión económica para que
To
esto
reach
se dé.
these goals, we need not only political will, but the will of the communities and the sponsors, the donors.
Encontrando una oportunidad en los bosques y el agua, hoy trabajamos en el manejo y uso sostenible de estos recursos.
You hear me? So again, seeing the opportunity of forest management, water management, and communities, we see the best opportunity.
En la gráfica, en la imagen, en color verde, encontramos nuestras nuevas áreas de intervención asociadas a los núcleos de desarrollo forestal.
Okay, can you answer the
So
green?
what Fernanda is explaining is the new government interventions in what they have called the forest nuclei of the development forest development nuclei, and where the government has prioritized the areas that are in green, which align with what the project is doing. So to the point of the new government came with a new proposal, but it
Overlapped.
aligns to what the project is already doing.
Donde la intervención está muy asociada al manejo forestal sostenible o a las concesiones forestales que nos explicó en la presentación anterior nuestro compañero del Congo.
And here, the policies have to do with sustainable development goals, but associated with there have been already forestry concessions. And that is very difficult to handle because they've already given the opportunity to operate on the forest. And how do you couple that with conservation policies?
Estas concesiones forestales hablan del aprovechamiento del recurso forestal maderable
Okay, so for wood extraction, that is what these concessions are all about.
y del recurso forestal no maderable,
And then so for
Timber and non-timber.
timber and non-timber.
que obedece a las semillas, resinas,
So seeds, resin,
látex,
latex, yeah,
que sostienen la cadena forestal.
which are all resources that sustain the forestry chain, the system.
Esto con una visión a 25 años.
And these we project in a vision to 25 years
Del manejo forestal con
of
comunidades.
forestry management. So the concessions have a vision of 25 years, a scope of 25 years.
Hoy como corazón de la Amazonía estamos generando las bases de gobernanza para la sostenibilidad de esta estrategia nacional.
So what it's important is that Corazón de la Amazonía that started before this new government has built the social cohesion and the governance to be able to achieve these government goals.
Okay. Este es un reto para las comunidades, para el gobierno y para los cooperantes. Sin embargo, las lecciones aprendidas nos llevan
Okay, and this is a major challenge, not only for the government, for the community, for the sponsors, for the institutions that are part of this.
nos llevan a mantener una convergencia desde el conocimiento científico, ancestral y técnico,
Again, what we've learned from this, again, the convergence between indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge,
que se comparte y fluye,
that we can share
interactúa,
and enrich, interact,
para poder generar una restauración como un esquema de gobernanza para la conservación de los recursos naturales.
in which conservation strategies are tied to governance, to management.
A partir del aprovechamiento sostenible y vinculando otras estrategias como el turismo de naturaleza,
And then part of this is bringing in not only conservation policies, but tourism,
que consoliden un modelo económico para los habitantes de la Amazonía.
in order to consolidate an economic model for the communities of the Amazon.
Durante estos casi, ¿cuántos llevamos, Ana? Ya 9 años de proyecto.
During the last 9 years of our project,
Son muchas las lecciones aprendidas,
we've learned many lessons.
pero nuestro trabajo ha radicado en promover, difundir un modelo de desarrollo basado en la sostenibilidad de los recursos naturales,
Okay, but our model is based on the sustainability of the natural resources,
dejando de lado el extractivismo
diminishing the extractivist policies that characterize the area,
y encontrando oportunidades a partir de la gente que habita la Amazonía.
and discovering opportunities with the communities that inhabit the Amazon.
Esto nos ha llevado también a unirnos con otros cooperantes,
This has led us to discover opportunities with partnerships, with networking,
y encontrar sinergias
establish synergies,
que al final responden a la necesidad del territorio.
that are engraved in the needs of the territory.
Este proyecto contribuye a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible,
Includes sustainable agriculture,
reducción de la pobreza generando mano de obra no calificada en territorios,
enhancing the labor force, providing jobs for non-qualified labor jobs,
y encontrando una seguridad alimentaria a partir del consumo de, ¿cómo decirlo?, de las especies amazónicas,
and enhancing food security based on the species that are grown in the Amazon.
y trascendiendo la información ancestral de las comunidades indígenas para el conocimiento de la ciencia y de los colonos que ocupan la Amazonía.
And connecting again the traditional knowledge, the indigenous knowledge, with scientific research and findings aimed at the improvement of the communities.
Ya para concluir y poder garantizar la sostenibilidad de todas nuestras acciones,
To ensure the sustainability or continuity of our actions,
hemos fortalecido la gobernanza institucional,
there's an aspect of governance, of strengthening the institutions,
generando capacidades técnicas para los profesionales de esas entidades
improving the technical skills of those that work in these government institutions,
que al final seguirán haciendo presencia en el territorio.
which are those that ensure continuity of the policies.
Así es como Corazón de la Amazonía ha marcado la diferencia de otros proyectos de cooperación en nuestro
And we
país.
really believe that this is one of the main reasons that has made us different from other initiatives in the country.
Y hoy Corazón de la Amazonía no solo es reconocido a nivel nacional e internacional, sino a nivel de las comunidades.
And we've gained national and international recognition, but more important, recognitions, acceptance, engagement on the part of the communities.
En esta ocasión, yo soy la privilegiada de venir a mostrarles el proyecto.
And I had the honor to show you the project.
Pero esto también lo podría hacer cualquiera de los productores productores
But
con los
this
que nosotros trabajamos.
presentation could have been made with any of the community leaders that are part of the project of the initiative.
Porque es un proyecto que se construyó con la gente.
Because it's a project, a program that has been constructed with the people.
Y en sus años de intervención se ha amoldado a los cambios en el territorio.
Okay, and then and we've introduced adjustments based on the needs of the communities and how the territory has been transformed.
Es por eso que la información está disponible para ustedes
And the information is available for you guys,
en nuestras redes sociales.
in our social media.
Y gracias por la oportunidad de presentar este megaproyecto ante ustedes.
And thanks for the opportunity. Gracias.
Gracias, and thank you so much for your presentation. We actually welcome all three projects that just presented back on stage. Can we please give them a warm hand? And thank you, David. That was wonderful. I appreciate that. Next, we will be introducing our expert panelist, beginning with Mr. Keith Bowers. Leveraging his landscape architecture training, Keith has devoted his career to applying the sciences of restoration ecology, conservation biology, landscape ecology, and ecological planning to restore critical habitat, mitigate impacts from climate change, and address environmental injustices. As a professional landscape architect and practicing restoration ecologist, Keith's work includes a broad range of spatial scales and ecosystem types, from regional landscape ecology planning to site-specific ecological restoration designs for critically impaired flora and fauna, conserving nature, restoring degraded ecosystems, and regenerating the human spirit continues to drive Keith's passions. Please all welcome Keith. Keith is the president and founder of Biohabitats, who is kind enough to also help sponsor this event. Next, we have Dr. Emmanuel Cohen-Sachom, who is a consultant, researcher, group lead, working at the interface between science, policy, and practice, focusing on environmental sciences and policy and nature-based solutions. She leads the thematic group of nature-based solutions at the IUCN Commission on Ecosystem Management. She has been co-leading the work on NBS at IUCN since 2014 and has led and co-led several NBS publications. She holds a Master's of Science in Environmental Sciences from Wageningen University. Yes, I've always had trouble. I can only read it in my head but not say it. Excuse me. In the Netherlands, and her PhD from Tel Aviv University in Israel, focusing on ecosystem services and ecosystem management in Mediterranean wetlands. Next, we have Mr. David Kuhn. David Kuhn is World Wildlife Fund's U.S. Corporate Resilience Lead. In his role, he works with multinational companies to provide guidance on sustainable initiatives and goals, helps them develop a deep understanding of current climate change impacts and future risks, and works in landscapes around the world to take a participatory, multi-stakeholder-based approach to prioritize design and test adaptation and resilience innovations that help people and nature. David has worked with the Coca-Cola Company, McDonald's, Gap, the Bioplastic Feedstock Alliance, McCormick, and others, along with local communities and governments to disseminate and scale lessons learned from this process to mainstream social ecological resilience approaches across landscapes and industry. Next, we have Dr. Gary Tabor, who is an ecologist and wildlife veterinarian. He has a bachelor's in science from Cornell, a master's in environmental science from Yale, and his veterinary medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania. In 2007, Gary founded the Center for Large Landscape Conservation in Bozeman, Montana, to support large-scale conservation initiatives around the world. He is also a professor of conservation practice at Cornell University. Gary has championed large landscape conservation internationally for over 35 years, having lived in Africa, South America, Australia, and Canada. He served 7 years as Yellowstone to Yukon Director for the Wilberforce Foundation. Gary is a recipient of the Australian American Fulbright Award in Climate Change and UPenn winner of the Henry Luce Scholar Award. Gary is chair of the IUCN WCPA Connectivity Conservation Specialist Groups. I would also like to note that his Globescapes helped us identify 10 or more connectivity projects that we were not familiar with. And last but certainly not least is Kyra Northwest, who is from the Montana First Nation, Akamic, one of the 4 Muscogee Cree nations within the Treaty 6 territory. She works for her nation as the duty to consult manager. Kyra is a founding member of the International Buffalo Relations Institute, whose main objective is to promote the implementation of the Buffalo Treaty and to support indigenous nations in returning buffalo to the lands to rebuild vital cultural and ecological connections. Her educational background is in anthropology, and she attended Grant MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta. In her downtime, Kyra likes to play sports and is active in hockey and slow pitch. She also loves to travel and attend concerts. Please give her a warm welcome.
Well, you've given us a design challenge. We have about 10 to 15 minutes here to have a conversation with all these people back and forth. So here we have a great deal of wisdom here. And so what we're going to do with this panel is our panelists are going to ask, I'm going to each of the panelists one at a time to essentially ask a question to our presenters, and they're only going to be able to ask one question just because we're going to run out of time. And for our presenters, you're going to have very concise, very focused answers because we really don't have a lot of time. But what we want to do in this session is find out, look under the hood, find out how these projects really work, what were their challenges, what were the successes, what made them sweat every day so that you understand that in these presentations, the hard work that makes them real. So if I could begin with Kyra, if you have any question you would like to ask the panelists, I give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to thank all of the panelists for introducing your projects to us. They're very great, and it's hard to think of just one specific question to ask, but my question is for Dominique. And my question is, how is empowering local communities and the indigenous peoples to make decisions on their lands increase the success of your project?
Thank you very much. That's a great and difficult question. As I said before, these lands are overlapped with richness in minerals, but also in biodiversity. And I think as a community, it's made these decisions based on 2 main reasons. First, they were afraid that at any time the government might come and take over those lands and transform them in other protected areas. For example, creating national parks. And when this land becomes national parks or nature reserve, they're gonna be kicked out again. So they said, oh, we are happy, we are doing conservation, we are able to do it, so we don't want the government to come here, we can do it alone, because they're afraid. And maybe the second reason would be because of those minerals. You know, what happens in DRC is that someone goes to the capital city and have a piece of paper and come into the village and say, hey, look, this area becomes mine. I'll be exploring minerals here for the next 10, 15 years. So you have to go out. So communities are actually using this legal tool, this community forestry law, which passed in 2014, to seize this opportunity of governing and managing their traditional lands so that they avoid the government to create new protected areas or the companies to come and, kicking them out because of exploring minerals. I think these are the two main reasons. But also, communities are understanding that now they have the hand of deciding the future of this land. The land makes the only means of subsistence in the region, and having a hand on this land means that they have a secure future for them and their generation. I think that's the main reasons.
Thank you. Thank you. David?
I know we were going to get one question. I have pages here. I guess I'll go down the line because I don't know if everyone has a chance to answer, each question. But just generally, I'm a resilience and adaptation guy, and it's a very complex sort of issue, regardless of the place that you're working. So I guess Dr. Hilsey, I'll go. I'll direct this question at you. But how are you taking into account the impacts of climate change, either on the communities themselves, how they're dealing with? A lot of times what we see is this sort of this misalignment between community groups, or this panic, essentially hitting the panic button when climate change is impacting a community, and they go out and they grab more resources, or if they're not planning for these future conditions, then you run into some issues, right? So how are you either planning for these climate change impacts in your program and project design, in the potential nature-based solutions, or the protected areas and the value of those protected areas for the certain species? Just generally, sort of, how is climate change factoring into the decisions that you're making on the project?
That's an easy question. Not. I'm just going to give one example. So we just had 1,000 fires, and we in Canada, we tried to blow all of that smoke to Ottawa and Washington, D.C. To try and make a call for change. But one of the kickbacks of that is, the forests are going to burn down anyway, and so we should log them sooner. And so part of what we really work on is actually getting information to communities about what makes their forests resilient, which is not putting roads through and not fragmenting forests, which we know leads to more likely that these forests are going to burn down. So that's just a example, but there's so many more. I'd love to talk to you later.
Thank you. Emmanuel?
Yes, thank you very much for all presentations. I have also questions for all three projects, but I will go for the third one then. I was wondering, given the complexity of such a project that you said is soon going to involve 8 countries with 8 different governments and ways of dealing with different issues, I was wondering if, this is coming from the global standard on NBS. We do emphasize the need to take into account policy integration, whether it's local, national, or international policy, and that is supposed to help in the different projects, whether it's planning and implementing the project. So I would like to know if you find that international environmental policy frameworks, first, if they're actually used, and if they can be helpful to have different governments accept, support such large-scale initiative, and maybe also agree on the priorities, for instance, or the different actions that need to be taken and how to proceed.
It's about the 8 countries. So the international policies do help, but it's more as a linking point for all and to make the countries converge. But it's really an excuse, to be honest, because what needs to happen, it's sort of like the regional interventions, like the regional cohesion. And one of the ways to make this complexity easier, not to be reduced, is the understanding of how all the countries are connected. That what is happening in Ecuador, if Ecuador continues doing oil and gas exploration, it's going all the way or the illegal mining, it's all the way going through other countries, affecting Colombia, affecting Peru, affecting Brazil. That notion of connectivity, that notion of how what you do, good and bad in one country, affects the whole basin, it's what really motivates that policy coherence and that policy is like that institutional thing that, of course, the international policies bring the commitment at global scale, bring finances at global scale, but to make it really happen, it needs to be that sense of integration, that sense of a bigger landscape, that it's challenging. There are sovereignty rights, there are limits, there are borders that some countries are more strict on making it respect, but the fish is flowing regardless of the country where they are. The communities, the indigenous communities feel their brothers and sisters regardless of the limits of the country. So once you see the bigger picture, the landscape, then you can make some changes. And to add in terms of policy, there is an institution, there is an organization that exists since 1978 that it's made for treaty cooperation between the Amazon countries. It has gone ups and downs in terms of the strength, but it brings into attention the need to have a structure or an organization that calls all the countries into action together. That would be mine. Thank you.
Thank you. Keith?
Great, fantastic presentations and projects. You know, most, and this will be for everybody, so if you want to just chime in for a couple comments, it would be great. So all of them with connectivity, it all begins with protection, right, and conservation, but then you're looking at restoration to fill in the gaps in between. And I'm just wondering from a restoration standpoint, like what have been some of your either biggest challenges in terms of implementing the actual restoration component of the project, and or some of the benefits that you've seen out of the restoration activities that you've done?
Okay, let me start, but I'm gonna be brief because only the project is still new, but in the last 5 years, what we've been happening in Mwenga, for example, is that this caterpillar coming back, which constitutes the source of protein for local communities, because the forest was now protected by not only these legal tools and instruments, but also by their customary regulations. And they are making a documentary on that because for like maybe 15 years, 20 years, the caterpillar were not there anymore. And they came just in the last 5 years. But in terms of limitation, I think it's mostly the companies. Companies will even kill people to gain money. And I've never understood this greed of companies about money. We need to teach and to educate companies to understand that money alone will not help us if we don't have biodiversity. So, you know, they're still pushing people to say, we can give you money and we exploit here, we cut trees here and so on. That's the only thing we are working on, but we are taking them on board to understand that in some areas they may exploit, but not industrial exploitation, but in other areas totally no-go zones.
I would just, the example I'll give is the West Moberly and Soto First Nations voluntarily stopped hunting caribou in the Peace River region when industrialization and all the forest fragmentation and loss caused that population to decline. But they then created a rehabilitation effort, and it's the only successful mountain caribou recovery happening. There was, I think, somewhere around 16 individuals, and today they have this. They put the females with the calves in a in kind of an enclosure right before the calves are born to keep the calves safe for their first 4 months of life. And they have, the whole community goes out and they're collecting lichen and feeding the caribou and protecting the caribou. It's a really difficult area to do this. And now they have over 200 caribou. They're also, the long term of it is they have to restore the habitat for the caribou, and this becomes the difficulty. There's a lot of racism, and there's a lot of people who want to just run their off-road vehicles on the logging roads. So the First Nations had restored this huge section of road. It took a whole summer, again, an all-community effort, and in one day, somebody illegally took out a company tractor and destroyed the whole thing. And so therein lies some of the challenges.
Ok. La restauración no es sembrar árboles.
Restoration is not just planting trees.
La restauración es recuperar la función de un ecosistema
Restoration is recovering the functionality of an ecosystem
y generar una economía a partir de ella.
and generate an economy based on it.
Nuestro principal reto es el monitoreo y seguimiento de estos procesos de restauración.
Our main challenge is the monitoring of these restoration processes.
Y ese monitoreo no es de las instituciones ni del país.
And that monitoring is not done by institutions or the government of the country.
El monitoreo y seguimiento debe ser de las comunidades.
The monitoring process should be done by the communities.
Es así como tenemos dos formas de hacer este monitoreo.
This is how we have two ways of carrying out this monitoring process.
Desde los sistemas de información de los institutos de investigación SINCHI,
From the research institutions and their monitoring services and technical expertise,
y el Instituto de Monitoreo de Bosque de Colombia.
and the Forest Monitoring Institute of Colombia.
Ellos generan los resultados reales del monitoreo de la restauración.
They generate real results of monitoring restoration processes.
Sin embargo, debe existir una metodología de monitoreo desde las comunidades.
However, they should have a process in place to ensure community participation in monitoring.
Que al final sus resultados se homologuen
That both of their results are parallel, are equal,
y al final poder ver si esta restauración está siendo efectiva en el tiempo.
and ensure that this restoration is effective over time.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my panelists, because of time, you only have one question. So it's your burning question. So of the four of you, do you have one question you would like to ask one of the panelists that you feel you were not able to ask because of time? Oh, good. We're going to have a battle here.
What about you, Gary?
I'm going to yield because I feel like there were some burning questions there. No? I will. David? One person.
Again, I have like 40 burning questions.
I know.
See how many I can fit into one?
Which is why we're going to have this, we're going to hold this again next year.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
No?
Well, so Dr. Hilty, again, what does nature positive mean?
Yeah, so nature positive, well, it's just a term, but the way that I consider it is not that just we are sustaining what we have today, but that actually we're restoring biodiversity into the future.
How do you measure it?
How do you measure it? Well, that's another.
So this is the connectivity section. Connectivity, as you learned, if you want to connect nature, you got to connect people, correct? Yeah. And when you learn the whole purpose of this whole symposia is that all these landscapes have one thing in common. They don't talk to each other. So here we are connecting those landscapes, and here we are connecting you to those landscapes. So I know there's going to be a transition here And that throughout the day, please connect with our fantastic presenters and our fantastic panelists. Thank you.